The river had two faces at the twins. To the west of the nearer tower, it moved slow as syrup under a skin of morning mist, its surface mottled with drift leaves and the reflections of gulls wheeling overhead. To the east, it hurried itself between piles of gray stone, sucking at the bridge with an eager sound like teeth drawing meat from a bone. Between the twin keeps, the bridges arched like spine bones. The towers were old as any bickering in the trident, new ugly and useful, with arrow slits like thin-lipped eyes and banners that clacked dull in the damp. Catelyn Stark tasted the air and knew it for a Frey day. River and mildew, tallow smoke, and a hint of stubbornness. She had not slept, though she had closed her eyes for the sake of her son. In the long hours of watching campfires burn down and listening to the skins and armor of the host settle and stir, she had remembered other waters. The ripple-down pools below Winterfell's Godswood, where Ned had taught her that cold could be a kind of truth. The blue curve of the Tully banners that had flown above her girlhood, their fish dancing in red and blue as if water were a banner's own breath. There were no weirwoods here, no white faces and red leaves, only the sullen willows that leaned toward the water as if tempted each moment to let go. Her gods had eyes carved in old wood. The Freys had eyes for coin and crossing. Robb rode beside her, gray wind moving like a gray thought, never more than an arm's reach away. He wore a plain cloak, and the rain had streaked his hair darker, and that morning, more than any other, she saw her brother in him, the way Edmure had once laughed at the rain, because it made him look fierce. And then the whole keep laughed, and he laughed too for pride's sake. Robb did not laugh. The men muttered their own humor. The Greatjon cracked his knuckles until the sound went like roots splitting. Roose Bolton stared as if he were counting the drops that beaded on the wolf's pelt. Robb's voice when he spoke was low and even. "We'll show courtesy," he said, and she heard the echo of her husband. That was Ned's stubborn courtesy, harder than iron. "I have no wish to show them anything else," Catelyn said. Above them, the banners lifted and sagged with a lazy reluctance. The Frey colors, silver and blue, the twin towers white on the field. She could almost convince herself the place had a grace of its own at a distance, the long lines of stone repeating one another like a song, though not a song she would choose. The freemen had called it a bridge keep. She would have called it a small spite perched on a river. They had sent riders yesterday under a flag of truce. The riders had been looked over like horseflesh at a fair, permitted to breathe the same air as the bridge lord, then sent back with a parchment of terms, written in a hand that wobbled with mean life. The parchment had smelled of onions and wax. Catelyn had read it twice, and then folded it with neatness she did not feel. The price was high. Safe crossing, the pledge of Frey swords, provisions, and Lord Walder being Lord Walder, his particular brand of assurance. She had known such a price would come. The river would take coin from anyone. The Freys were the river with a ledger. Robb watched the bridge as if he could already see the way his men would file across. The wagons, the mules, the carpenters with their tools clinking softly in their bags. She saw him imagine the weight of it, the decision, the peril, the men behind him whose wives had kissed their fingers and pressed them into their palms with the quiet superstition that kisses could turn arrows aside. "He offered 3 daughters," Robb said, almost listening to himself. "Taste the words." "He offered 30, Catelyn said. She had counted as they had paraded past in Lord Walder's hall years ago. 30 had not been the number. Her mind made numbers obedient when it wanted to. 2 wives had swollen bellies at that feast, and the laughter had been stale bread in her mouth. "He offers as a man offers stale goods, by the cart." Gray Wind's ears flicked, the dog's whole body making no sound but that alert shiver of notice. Catelyn followed the direction of the ears and saw a figure on the far tower parapet, small to her eye at that distance, but still unmistakable. A man leaning forward at an angle between curiosity and contempt. He had a Frey posture if there was such a thing. He watched a long time, then spat. A dark arc that fell into the light. Beside her, the blackfish shifted in his saddle. He looked like a blade honed down to its most useful edge, all tendon and purpose. "You could keep your boy single and cross elsewhere," Brynden said. "There are fords west that go shallow this time of year. Tedious, muddy, slow enough for Lannisters to pluck at us, but possible. Mentry. And Tywin sits to the south of River Run. Robb's mouth had a stubbornness that had not yet grown into what it would become. We need to be over. And Lord Frey, Brynden said, needs a story to tell at his table until he dies. He will tell it any way he pleases regardless. But you can give him a better tale to chew on. Robb did not look at him. He looked at the bridge as if it were a problem in a book. He wants me to make his house part of mine. It is better to invite a hound inside than leave him to howl at the door, Catelyn said. So long as you keep him tied. You think he can be tied? Brynden said. I think men like Lord Walder not themselves, Catelyn said. We need him, and we can watch him. The price of crossing is a price we can keep paying, so long as Robb keeps his word. My word, Robb said, and the way he said it, Catelyn heard how he had said his first prayers as a boy. Gravely, lips shaping sounds he understood as something old in him answered. My word is my father's word, mother. His eyes were on the river. I will keep it. When the trumpets went up, they did not go high. This was not a place for music to travel. Sound sat heavy at the twins, a low horn moan that seemed to roll along the water and under the bridge where eels might hear it. The gates opened like a mouth grudging a word, and the small party that rode forward had the careful look of dancers stepping onto unfamiliar boards. The Greyjohn laughed, but without teeth in it. The Frey men-at-arms who met them at the middle of the bridge had faces like old leather. Inside the tower, the air had a wet wood smell, and a temper that had never been improved by incense or song. The hall had the look of where Walder Frey held court and leaned back to hear about himself. On the walls, the Freys stared down. Grim faces painted by reluctant men who could not be paid enough to put courage in them. The candles were tall but stingy, their flames thin, as if the tallow had been rendered from something reluctant to be useful. Lord Walder himself was a collection of bones, wrapped in a skin that had too much of his nose in it. He seemed formed of several men at once, none of them in agreement. When he smiled, the room took a step backward. He listened to their names, pretending to remember each, with the exact amount of interest he owed their banners. Then he made a show of remembering more than he should. Ah, the Greyjohn, he said. I can smell ale off your breath from here. If I wave a sausage, will you heal? The Greyjohn's laugh had edges in it sharp enough to cut bread. Bread and salt, Catelyn said, and it made its way through several ears before it found one that understood courtesy. A girl brought a tray with a salt cellar shaped like the Twin Towers, a crude thing with bumps for bricks, the salt caked at the rim, and a half loaf of bread stiff at the crust. Lord Walder's eyes watched the bread go from hand to hand with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Robb took a pinch of salt and bit into the bread. Catelyn followed, the Blackfish, the Greyjohn, Roose Bolton, each of them turning the ancient lock of guest right between their teeth. Let it never be said under my roof a guest found less than his due, Lord Walder said. And for an instant some brittle pride warmed him and then cooled again into calculation. Now, the business of the bridge. You wish to cross, boy, and you wish to bring those noisy hills you call men across it with you. And you wish my banners to march in your shadow and remind you of all the steps you would not take if I was not stepping them with you. I wish an alliance, Robb said. I wish to come to my mother's home by the safest way. I wish to bring the North where it is needed. These are not wishes you cannot grant. Men are wishes. Lord Walder made the word into something to be swallowed with a grimace. And what do I get for granting wishes? The songs will say you leapt the river like a king stag. The songs never say what the bridge cost to mend. Robb's mouth went a little tight, then softened, and Catelyn loved him for it, because she saw him remember who he was. He could say king, and he did not. Your house will have all honors due a loyal ally of Winterfell and River Run, he said. Provisions. Silver. Your sons placed where they may win glory. I will make no claim to a drop of Frey blood, and I will honor. He stopped because Lord Walder was already shaking his head in a small twitch, like a fly-stung horse. Oh, honors, Lord Walder said. A boy's ragbag. You have something better. You have soft northern throat, and you have seed to spill into a Frey bed." He lifted his hands, palms up, as if to say, "See, I know you, and I know me, and I know all things that matter are counted on fingers. You have no wife, Lord Stark. You have a need of men. I have daughters like leaves on a piss elm. Choose one. Take her tonight. Tomorrow my men march with you, and you march under my bridge until it is behind you and mine to lift again for whoever comes along next." Ben? In. In the silence that followed the phrase, piss elm lay like a worm on the table. The blackfish's mouth did not move. The great Jun seemed to be testing the weight of his laugh, the way a man tests the weight of a sword before lifting it, before his son. Roose Bolton's pale eyes were slivers of tallow with wicks buried in them. Caitlin felt Robb look at her without turning his head. It was a boy's look and a man's both. The look of someone who knew the rightness and bitter taste of it, and was counting the days that would be changed by it. "My lord," Robb said, and his voice was careful, "I will take one of your daughters to wife." The change in the hall was not sound so much as the lack of some expected sound. Several of Lord Walder's children, who had assembled along the side like a hedge of different heights and colors, blinked as if they had expected a more elaborate dance. One girl in a green kirtle pressed her lips together until the bottom one disappeared, and another, whose hair was the flax gold that fails to be luminous, looked down at her hands as if they had tricked her. "You will," Lord Walder said, and the wet satisfaction in it was something Caitlin was ashamed to hear and angrier to have to ignore. He made a show of considering among his abundance, looking across his daughters and granddaughters, like a miser choosing which coin to spend, not which to keep. Caitlin thought he would be cruel, that he would choose a punishment as he always did. But Lord Walder had other pockets to look to this day. "Rosalind," he said, "come out from behind your sister's shoulder, girl. Let the wolf see what manner of rabbit he is to hunt." The girl who stepped forward was small and fair, not the radiant gold of a song's invention, but the pale cream that shows up blue under candlelight. Her hair had been brushed until it had the electricity of a child's, and when she lifted her head, Caitlin saw that she had her mother's mouth. One of the later wives, timid and almost pretty, but for the way she kept her jaw clenched to protect some last boundary. Rosalind's hands were clean, her nails short and tidy. She looked at Robb, then away, then at him again, as if she were practicing a skill useless in the twins. "Very well," Robb said. He had not looked away. "You may have her tonight," Lord Walder said. "And if you break her, she is last year's bad weather to me. But if you keep her sweet, if she makes a boy with a wolf's face and Frey eyes, then we are all one family of snarling and sneering, and the singers may break their heads making sense of it." "I would have a septon," Robb said. "And also," he glanced to Caitlin. She could feel the old gods like quiet animals gathered in a wood, noses lifted to scent his thought. "I was wed by my father before a heart tree. There is no heart tree in the twins," Lord Walder said with the complacence of a man content not to look at anything that does not resemble him. "We have order here, and pews, and bells." "There are willows," Caitlin said, because she refused to let the river go without a drop of their god's hearing. "We will speak the words by the willows, and by your bells too. Two walls are stronger than one." She caught Lord Walder's eyes. They skittered away. "You will not begrudge us a prayer." "I begrudge nothing that takes you across my bridge the quicker," Lord Walder said. "Septon Hugh," he called. The man who produced himself was thin as a page marker and twice as bendable. "Oil your tongue and find your book. We are to make a match." What came after had the shape of a wedding and the taste of negotiation. A girl with a nose too sharp for her beauty to survive carried the wine. Several boys fetched cups and spilled only as much as Freys ever spilled when the eyes were on them. The hall filled with the soft racket of preparation, and the blackfish slipped away to see the terms written, to watch the roster of banners ink its way into meaning. Caitlin stood at Robb's side as if he were a tree in need of sheltering from a wind. She could neither see nor deter. Rosalind stood like someone who had been picked from a play in progress and asked to do another scene entirely without rehearsal. At the river later, the willows leaned until their switches trailed in the current. A gray rain drifted that never committed to falling. They said the old words softly. Robb's hand was warm in Rosalind's, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were the color of wet bark. He spoke the words he had learned at Winterfell, and the sound of them made the willows stilly. With ice and iron, he said. With water and winter. Rosalind whispered her part, and in that whisper was relief, that there were words older than Lord Walder's voice and demands older than his ledger. The Septon's words were tighter and louder, and bells rattled on a rope that had seen many small hands pull it. Lord Walder held a cup like a judge passing a last sentence, and made a joke about betting that no one laughed it loudly enough to please him. The bread was bland, and the wine better than she had feared, and worse than she hoped. Robb kissed Rosalind's brow, and then her mouth, a brief dry kiss like a sealing of wax. And in the hall the phrase clapped because you clap to prove you are alive in a place that is mostly stone. Later, there were forms to endure. The betting had a roar prepared for it. The men and women of the hall rose in a ritual of hands and ribaldry. Catelyn stood until it moved toward her son, and then stepped forward between Robb and a clutch of Frey boys, ready to paw with loud innocence. Her voice could be kind and could be iron. She fed it with iron now. Enough, she said. He is your lord now as well as mine. He will go with his wife with dignity. The boys had sense enough to be afraid of something that did not raise its voice. Lord Walder, who might have enjoyed the sight of small cruelties more than large, tittered and shrugged. Oh, leave the wolf his fur, he said. The women did not push either. Rosalind looked at Catelyn with a gratitude that made something unclench in her. In the chamber they gave them, with a window that looked on the eastern water, the night was for breathing. The bed had hangings dyed a color that wanted to be wine, and could not manage it. The candles burned steady. The twins kept their drafts for stairwells. Robb closed the door with a care that made the click of the latch sound friendly. Rosalind stood near the bed and did not know what to do with her hands. She folded them in front of her, and then behind. Then laid them palms down on the coverlet, smoothing it as if smoothing might slow time. She was younger than Catelyn had guessed in the hall, or the light made her so. She had a small scar along her right wrist, the white line almost pretty. "I'm sorry," Robb said, because he must have felt the apology in the air. "That this is not how it is in songs." Rosalind finished softly. She smiled a small smile as if showing she could manage a joke if it was hers to offer. "The songs we have at the Twins are mostly about crossing things that do not want to be crossed." He considered her as if she had just moved from a place on the board. He had expected her to stand. "I did not think he would choose you. I did not think he would waste a daughter he likes on someone who might soon die," she said. It was not cruelty. She said it like someone examining the seam of a glove. "But he counts things differently from day to day. Today he counted me a good coin." "Damn. He will not have cause to regret it," Robb said. And that was a captain speaking, and also a boy promising to be good if given a dog. "I will treat you with honor. I should like that." She said, and then because she was not foolish and because anxiety makes its own brave honesty, she added, "I am afraid." "So am I," he said, and the quiet truth of it made her look up quickly. "Not of you," he added, and that made the corner of her mouth curve again. "Nor of this. Of all that comes when we cross the bridge." "Then Danny." She sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed the coverlet again. "I have crossed that bridge so many times I do not see it any longer when I look out," she said. "But your men, they made the bridge loom. I dreamed last night of stones with eyes watching my sleep. Perhaps it is a good thing to make the stones watch us. They are lazy otherwise." Robb laughed, the sound loosening something in his shoulders. "If stones had eyes, the twins would have been built elsewhere," he said. He looked at her hair and then at his hands. "I can send for the septa to attend you if..." "No," she said. Her voice surprised her. Firm. "No." "Sit." She patted the bed, then blushed, as if she were the rude one. He sat. "If I am to go with you to your war, I will not weep at every turn because a man looks at me. She bit her lip, and let go of it thoughtfully. I have learned to walk where my father wants me to stand. I am tired of standing. You wish to ride with us? Robb said. He was curious, not wary. I wish to see a tree that has not learned my name, she said. I wish to hear what a river says when it is not forced to speak through his arches. She looked at his hands, where scars were beginning to make their white alphabet. And if I am to be put into a story, let it be for something I did, and not only for what was done to me. It was not the talk of a girl in a green kirtle standing in a hall with her jaw set tight. It was talk from a window, open to air she had not breathed enough of. You may come, he said, and meant it. Mother will say it is unseemly. The blackfish will say it is unwise. But there is no unseemliness in war if we keep decent where we may, and no wisdom that never risks. You may ride in the rear. There will be women with you who know how to boil leather into soup, and how to thread a needle through skin if it must be done. There will be nights when we sleep sitting up, and the rain finds the seam in the tent, no matter how carefully it was pitched. There will be days when we march all day and do not come nearer to where we mean to be. But there will be trees and rivers that do not know you. Will that be enough? Bam? She was looking at him with a consideration almost grave. For a beginning, she said. They did not reach for one another as the phrase expected them to do. They spoke about where she had learned to stitch, on coarse cloth for poor cloaks, because the good cloth was saved for those who would not need it. He told her how Winterfell's kitchen smoked in hard frost, and how hot pies came out of it like miracles, steam in the air, the smell of onion and beef and pepper, strong enough to bring boys in from the yard by the nose. She asked him if the snow there whispered as it does in tales, and he told her it did. Not words, but the sound of a secret deciding which of them to tell you. Gray Wind lay down at the door and yawned, the breath of him like damp fur, and something wild. In the morning, the twins had the look of a thing satisfied against its will. The bridges were open to them, and the men began to move as if someone had lifted a hand from their shoulders. Wagons creaked, oxen grunted, the mules put their heads down and worked. The Great John bellowed orders as if the river were hard of hearing. Roose Bolton arranged his men with a quiet economy that made the hair at Catelyn's nape stir. The Freys turned from gate guards into bannermen, their faces a different kind of sullen. Lord Walder stood in his doorway as they went, counting, always counting. If he had been a mill, Catelyn thought, his stones would grind men into flour. He sniffed at her as she rode by, and his mouth made a movement that could have been congratulations to a mother or a sneer at a woman who had come to market to sell a son and been paid in salt. We'll have you back again, my lady, he said. Your boy will need reminding of the road. I have no doubt you will remind him. She said, and he laughed, pleased at hearing himself in her mouth. Rosalind rode in a small knot of women, her new cloak still stiff at the clasp, the wolf's head too large for her shoulders. Beside her rode Lady Madge Mormont, square and stout, a spear upright in her stirrup like a young tree, her face ruddier than the weather. Hold your back straight, Madge told Rosalind. If you slouch, you'll feel the road in your spine by noon. Rosalind straightened. She glanced back once at the tower. Several girls stood on the parapet, their hair gray as stone at this distance. She lifted her hand in a small wave that was not returned, then set her eyes on the road and did not look back again. When she leaned a little forward in the saddle to pat the mare's neck, the movement was careful and already learning to be at ease. Robb rode at the van with the men he trusted, the Blackfish at his left hand, the Greyjohn at his right, Grey Wind ranging ahead into the flanks, a bannerman carrying the Grey Direwolf on white, the cloth slapping against the spear in the wind. There were cheers from the rear as the carts rolled onto the bridge. The sound pleased the river. It made a low small chatter as if appreciating a joke finally told well. They crossed in order, foot, horse, wagon on. The bridge groaned as a fat man groans when he rolls over in sleep. Catelyn crossed with Rosalind's little party, the willows brushing at their legs where the bridgewood left space enough to grow. She glanced down, saw the water churn around the piers, brown and restless, flecked with foam. Do you suppose the bridge speaks to the river? Rosalind asked, low. as if the willow leaves had ears. If it does, the river does not listen long, Caitlin said. Rivers listen to themselves. That is their nature. The twins attempt to make it speak their words, Rosalind said, with the dangerous smallness of a truth, told softer than it deserved. She touched the pommel of her saddle. I liked the willow words better. On the far side the country opened, and immediately narrowed again into hedgerows and fields that showed the thumbprint of men and taxes. The land had a muddled look common to places too long held in a compromised hand. It did not know if it was growing wheat for someone to harvest or just waiting for a different boot to crush it. The sky had the high white that promises blue when it decides to. The air smelled of damp, turned earth, and the iron of old rain. At their first night's camp beyond the bridge, the men set about making order out of chaos, with that particular art that separates soldiers from pilgrims. The tents went up not as houses, but as promises to be houses again tomorrow. Fires bit kindling, and then logs, and then the fat of meat. Someone had onions in a sack, and the smell of them frying made men remember home with an uncomfortable pleasure. Caitlin sat in the little slice of tent that was hers, and listened to men laugh from their bellies, and was grateful for it. Laughter kept men from counting their dead before the hour came. Robb came to the women's ring once the orders were given. He moved with the quickness of someone who had learned already that time was a blade and sleep, a scabbard he did not always have time to put it in. He asked Rosalind if she had need of anything, and she asked him for a comb because the wind and rain had made of her hair a creature that wanted to ride its own way. He brought her his mother's comb without asking if he could. Later, with the rain finally deciding to be rain or to stop, Rosalind sat on a low stool outside the tent and worked the comb through her hair. Mage Mormont watched her, and the watching was not unkind. "You'll need a knife on a thong around your neck," Meg said. "And you'll need to know how to gut a rabbit if we run short, which we will, and how to tell the difference between a cough that will pass and one that will take a man down in the night unless you put a hot stone on his chest." "Menorti. I can learn," Rosalind said. It was not timid. "I stitched my younger brother's cut when he fell in the hall. Lord Walder told him not to bleed on the rushes if he could help it. So I held him steady and made the stitches while the maester looked for his needle. And then I taught the maester where he'd left it." She looked down at the comb. "I know where things are left." "Good," Mage said with an approving grunt. "If you were the kind to cry, I would tell you where to do it, and for how long. But I think you are the kind to save it for winter, and that works just as well." Caitlin came to sit with them for a little while, because the sound of the men sharpening blades had a way of getting into her sleep when she tried to begin it. Rosalind looked up at her with hair wild and face clear of cosmetics she had not needed in any case. In the light of the fire, her eyes were greener than Caitlin had expected, with a ring of brown close around the pupils. She looked like a child Caitlin had once known in River Run who had fed stray cats under the table and never been caught because she always gave Lord Hoster the fattest fish first. "I used your comb," Rosalind said, showing the better part of a tangle that had given up. "I hope that is not an offense." "Combs are for hair," Caitlin said and smiled. "Is the road kinder than the river imagined in your head?" "It is already kinder," Rosalind said. "For all it jostles me. No one told me my shape did not please the door when I passed through it." "Bendarantrao." "Caitlin did not say you are sweet, and your sweetness is a peril here. She did not say you are the daughter of a man who sells bridges, and you will have to learn what to do with the change." She looked at the girl and said, "You will tell me if you need a different saddle. I will have one from the baggage. There is no sense in your being rubbed raw, because men think women ride side saddle in songs." "Now." Rosalind nodded, the movement making her hair fall over her eyes, and she brushed it back with a hand made competent by necessity. "I will," she said, and after a moment, "Lady Caitlin, thank you." She said it carefully, with the kind of care that means the words weigh more than they seem. In the next days they moved at a pace that was always almost too slow. A war host is a beast with many legs, and it must learn not to trip over itself. Scouts fanned ahead and returned with news that smelled of sweat and fear. The Lannisters had made a mess of the Riverlands, but left gaps in their malice. Tywin set snares with his patience, which was always the trap one failed to see until the foot was crushed. Robb listened with his mouth closed and eyes open, which was a good habit. He slept less. He rode more. He learned to drink water as if it were salt, and he had only so much of it to measure to the meat. The Great John kept up a running argument with anyone who would listen about whether the bridge at the Twins had been built by idiots or by men like himself, which is to say idiots with a purpose. Bolton's men never raised their voices and never laughed, and sometimes Caitlin found herself looking at their camp and forgetting it was there until she turned her head and found it had moved closer. The Karstarks smoked silently when the sun went down and then stamped their pipes on the ground as if the ground owed them that consideration. Harrion Karstark had a way of looking at his father that made Caitlin think of boys who had lived under roofs that leaked and been told to be grateful for it. Robb came to the council smelling of rain and horse. When he set his hands on the map, he owned it more by patience than by temper. The Blackfish spoke the truth that men did not wish to hear with a softness that made them listen. "We cannot fight Tywin where he chooses," he said. "And he chooses everywhere he goes. We must choose for him. The Whispering Wood offers us a chance to choose." He tapped a place on the map where the ink of the river lines had bled a little into the parchment. "Jaime Lannister does not know caution when it is offered. He will ride to answer an insult, believing he is being given a gift. We must insult him and then take the gift." Robb looked to Roose Bolton. "What say you, my lord?" "Your uncle's plan is sound," Bolton said. His voice had no stickiness to it. "And if it fails, we can always call it bravery." "We can call it that in any case," the Great John said. "When the song runs out of rhymes, they say brave, and no man can object from his grave." Rosalind listened, though no one asked her to speak. She had a way of standing to one side that did not look like hiding. Her eyes went from the map to the men and back again. When the council broke, she sought Caitlin without fuss. "Will there be men left to guard the baggage?" she asked. "There will be," Caitlin said. "And we will move it behind the hill as the Blackfish orders, and put the women under the lee." Rosalind nodded. "And the children?" "There are no children," Caitlin said. "We did not bring them." The girl's mouth worked as if she had almost let out a thought and pulled it back so it would not call attention to itself. "There were some at the Twins," she said. "I only thought." She let the thought go. "I will help where I can. You will stay with the women and not run toward any excitement," Madge Mormont said, passing with her spear over one shoulder. "Men have the unreasonable habit of dying in order to be noticed." Rosalind smiled. "I have the reasonable habit of noticing those who don't die." she said, and Madge snorted approval as if the sentence had been a good spear thrust. That night, the camp became an ear. The men said little. The horses grunted. Gray wind came and went as if he were wind indeed, vanishing into the dark brush and appearing again, never with leaves in his fur because the forest feared to touch him. Caitlin sat with the women, her hands busy with something small and practical. She had learned in war that hands want employment, so the mind doesn't employ itself with the worst uses. Rosalind passed her a length of thread without being asked when she saw Caitlin's measure fall short. The girl had a feel for absence. It would serve her. Robb came to them once, though he had no reason to. He had his cloak, and the rain had decided again to be mist, and it made jewels of the wolf hair near the clasp. He looked at Rosalind with that straightforward attention he gave any of his men and any of the injured. "It will be loud," he said, as if reassuring her about weather. "And then it will be quiet. And then it will be loud again. That is how men die. If it is loud too long, pull the tent flaps close, so the younger ones can pretend it is only thunder." "Is it ever only thunder?" Rosalind asked. "In the north," he said. "In winter." There was something like a smile. "You will see." After that he went back into the night, to the place where men pretend they can tell the dark more about itself than it knows. Caitlin watched him go, and felt the old ache under her ribs that she had learned to share with no one because it could not be healed. She remembered the boy who had climbed higher than he should have as soon as he could see over the walls, and how Ned had stood below him with hands in his belt, and a quiet study of the stones, letting the boy find his fear and his courage both in their measure. That was the only gift that mattered, and it was not one a mother could give, though she would have cut herself in half to do it. At dawn, the light was the color of old linen. They moved. The blackfish took one part of the men, Robb another. Caitlin felt the axis of things shift as if a heavy coin had rolled in a shallow bowl. The whispering wood did what it had always done. It whispered, and men mistook that for being told secrets. In the rear, with the baggage, Rosalind stood with the other women. She had a length of cloth slung over one shoulder and a needle hilt between her teeth, because she had not had a better place to put it at the moment she needed both hands. She did not ask questions no one could answer. She looked at the line of trees and imagined, if she must, that beyond them men were doing things they had practiced and been taught, and would thus do well. The sound rose in waves as if the land itself had learned how to breathe. There were horns, their own, the enemy's. Edmure's old horn burned into the memory of a girl who had lived there once. She did not like that she could tell the difference. Meg Mormont told a girl not to cry because it would salt her water, and they might need that later. Caitlin sat in a way that would not look like waiting and counted the heartbeats that fell between one horn call and the next. The ground under their feet was damp and obedient. It did not betray them with mud or with a treacherous rock. The wood whispered, as always. When the first riders came back, wild and grinning, their faces striped with whatever the night had made of their blood and sweat, the sound changed again. It had the shape of victory, but men have been fooled by that shape before. Robb came later with Jaime Lannister on a rope behind him. The rope was mostly for the look of it. The Kingslayer's hands were bound and his mouth had cut itself smiling. The men whooped and brought their horses tighter around the pair to show ownership. Gray wind ran at the edge of it, snapping at Joy's heels. Robb looked older by a year, his jaw set and a tenderness in his eyes when he looked where Caitlin stood that he would never show where anyone else could see. Caitlin walked to meet him because she would not have him come all the way to her. She stood at a distance that made nonsense of mothering and sense of politics, and she put her hand on his boot for a moment, as if his skin could feel through leather. "You did what you meant to do," she said. "I did what I could," he said. The Kingslayer laughed softly. "And I did what I always do, Lady Stark. I made a mess of a thing and smiled about it. The difference today is that the rope chafed. Your son is a better hunter than I looked to find." "Now, your smile cuts your lip," Caitlin said, because it did. There was a thin line of red along his lower lip. "Perhaps you have mistaken yourself for a knife." He smiled wider because the man had made his own blood into a coin to spend. "Perhaps," he said. "Perhaps we will find out what metal I am made of where you are taking me." He found out nothing that day. They put him under guard where the ground was softest. So if he lay, it would remind him that the earth was not always stone. The men drank, but not all. The blackfish kept them, as he always did, hovered between celebration and preparation. "There's more to do," he said, and he looked at Robb with the love that can share the truth and be forgiven. "You have made the first of your luck. Make the second while you can." Rosalind did not go to look at the Kingslayer. It would have been theater for herself, and she did not yet know what plays she wanted to put on. Instead, she went to the tents where they had brought the hurt and found a boy whose leg had been stitched roughly and tied too tight. She saw at once by the gray around his mouth that pain had laid him down like a heavy cloak. "Sit him up," she told the woman nearest, and the woman, after a brief up and down look that measured this new wife against necessity, did as she asked. Rosalind cut the binding and rewrapped it with more give in the turn and more pressure where the blood wanted to puddle. She put her hand on his hair when he cried out a little and did not wince when the tears wet her fingers. "Your name?" she said. "Tom 7, he said. "No, not 7. Sir says that's a song name I took. Tom from in the neck, my lady. Tom Frog, they call me." He tried a grin that could not be bothered to finish itself. "I don't mind. Frogs are lucky if you catch them." "We caught you," Rosalind said and smiled. "Have luck." She fed him a sip of the broth that had gone thick in the pot, and its fat shone on his lips. and she wiped it away with a cloth all the same. By evening, the men had sung the first half of 3 songs. The second halves would be sung later, or in another season, or not at all. Robb sent for Rosalind when he could pull himself free from the list of things that wants to be done when you win. Bind prisoners, count your dead again, because you cannot have counted right. She came to him, and he took her hands, and they stood in the space between tents where smoke went up like black water. "We have him," Robb said. And there was a piece of astonishment in his voice that said he had understood the plan, and believed it, and had not, even so, expected the world to keep its part. "You have him," Rosalind said. She did not say what is a lion on a rope to a lion that has learned to gnaw. The blackfish came out of the smoke. "We go to River Run," he said. "Your Uncle Edmure needs you more than he knows. Tywin sits at Harrenhal and plays patience. Let us bring him a game he has not yet taught himself to win." "Ben? And the twins?" Robb asked, because having something to be grateful for can make a man suspicious of all his choices that led to it. "Behind us," Brynden said with a small smile. "Still there. Still counting. They will not pack themselves up overnight any more than any old habit will. They will be there when you return, if you return." Catelyn closed her eyes for a second and opened them. "We will go to River Run," she said. "My brother's folly is as dear to me as his courage. I have enough love for both." Bentro. The march to River Run had a different air to it. Men ride differently when they follow hope instead of necessity. The river changed its voice. More open water, fewer bridges with a mind to argue. They saw farms left with the doors open in that way. That means the owners had left in a hurry and hoped to come back before they needed to be angry with strangers. They saw fields burnt low, and fields allowed to stand as if spared by accident. In the hedges, mares watched them pass with the indifference of those who had business before men had invented theirs. When River Run rose up out of its water, Rosalind touched her horse's neck, as if to calm the animal and herself both. Catelyn breathed in, because there are some places that carry your breath for you, if you do not mind. The red and blue banners had the fresh look of things that have not been asked to keep too many promises yet. The men with tully fish on their breasts looked tired the way men look tired after a long day of loving, and being loved badly, and being promised better at dawn. Edmure came out to meet them with his jaw set. He had not slept well in years, because that is how long it takes a boy's sleep to become a man's common rest. He embraced Robb with an affection that tried too hard to be authority, and then kissed Catelyn on the cheek, as if he would apologize for every fish he had ever failed to catch in front of her. He looked at Rosalind with curiosity, and at the Frey small banner that had found its way among the host with unease. Frey," he said, when told. And the 3 words held a small history of dinners and Bridgert tolls, and the delicate art of not saying aloud what one had said in kitchens. "Well, we are all kin now," or so he would like to say. "He will say it loudly," Catelyn said. "Let us speak softer, and do the work that must be done." They brought the Kingslayer within, and put him where stone would make him feel smaller. Edmure began to give orders that had the shape of sense, and the scent of pride. The blackfish stood at his shoulder and said a thing here and there that made the orders sound better when repeated. Robb took the parts of the command that did not fit into a keep: the riders, the scouts, the river crossings beyond. Catelyn moved through the rooms as if she were pushing her hands into old pockets and finding what she had left there long ago. The rugs, the way the light hit the corner near the hearth at mid-morning, the shelf where Hoster had kept the jars of herbs that were more sentiment than medicine. Rosalind stood in a doorway of the hall and watched the work of a house being a house in a time when houses must be something else too. "Your home," she said to Catelyn, with a gentleness that did not assume. "It is full. It is fuller than I would like," Catelyn said. "It is emptier than it should be." She put her hand to the carved fish that had sat above the hearth, since before she had learned her letters. "Home is a word that likes to make liars of us." Rosalind nodded. She would not pretend to understand yet. She went where she could be useful. In the kitchens, she told the cook how to stretch the onions by cooking them slower and longer, how to save the bread crusts for broth, because men will eat broth that tastes like bread when they will not eat more bread. The cook took this with good humor, because practicality was a language he spoke. In the infirmary, she rolled bandages and shook her head over a careless stitch, and redid it without commenting on the pride that had made it. Robb came to her when he could, and they spoke in a small room where the window opened over a courtyard, and a tree drooped branches that had been trimmed badly a year ago, and never given a chance to heal properly. He told her what the riders had seen, the Lannister foragers, the dead forests where men had cut and burned to deny shelter to others, the small hamlets where women had hidden their men in holes in the ground and put their own hands to the plow. She told him which of the men had fevers that smelled of the damp, and which of the boys had the thin look that means he must be made to sit or he will fall. It was not a love like the singers carry on about. It was the kind of love that passes a cup and does not spill. Sometimes at night, he would come with the weight of the day on his shoulders and sit and let it be there while they did not speak about it. He would tell her one small story, a new recruit who had held his spear wrong and then learned, a Karstark who had seen a heron in a field and cried because it looked like home from a far roof. She would answer with one of her own. The kitchen girl who had taken to wearing a ladle at her belt like a knight wears a sword, or the old woman who had survived more winters than some trees and told Rosalind to remind the Northern Lord that if you salt fish too soon, it grows tough. Tell him, the woman had said, with that entitlement the old carry as naturally as a child carries a toy, to salt his pride slower. I will, Rosalind had said, relishing the mischief in imagining herself doing so. She did, when the moment permitted. He took it with the seriousness that can make jests matter more than sermons. Do you think they hate me less for being a Frey? She asked sometimes, with that gentle curiosity. Or more. Some not at all, he would say. Some more, but not for long. They are busy. And your mother? She asked once, gathering courage. My mother loves me, he said. You will not go unloved long where she is. She does not waste her hate on at least half of what could deserve it. She is precise. Rosalind looked at her hands. I would like to learn that. She looked up. Precision. It will keep you alive, he said. It will not comfort you at night when you have made a precise decision and a friend has died because of it. Then I will learn a second skill, she said, catching at humor like a hook on which to hang sense. Comfort. In Riverrun's Godswood, there was no heart tree. Only elms and an old ash that had seen more weddings than it had liked. Catelyn went there anyway and stood with her hands flat on the bark and let her mind settle into that silence she had learned beside Ned. The old gods had no bells and no book. They had leaves and wind and the way your breath comes and goes. Keep him, she said, because prayer is sometimes only a matter of telling the air what you hope will not be stolen. Keep him a little longer. If the air had an answer for her, it was as old as water. She took it as she always had, a resource, not a promise. The message from King's Landing about Sansa and Arya came and went like a nail driven halfway into a board and then left, to warp. Catelyn's pain at that news was a private room she closed the door of outwardly, and those who loved her could hear her in it. She pressed Edmure to be wise when he was about to be brave, and to be brave when he had made himself wise. She pressed Robb to consider his choices like a man who knows he might have to eat them later. When Theon Greyjoy asked to go to Pike, it was on a night when the wind smelt of the iron in its name. He had that restless air of a dog at the edge of a circle of men, and the laugh he used to whip himself with. Let me bring you ships, he said. Let me be your man, and the man of the father who sent me to be a lesson, and not a son. He did not say that last, but the words made their shape in the air all the same. He looked at Rosalind once, not with any insolence, but with the curiosity men have for new arrangements. Rosalind looked back, unflinching, not giving him a game to play. You would go alone? Robb asked. I would go as the son of Balon Greyjoy, Theon said. As well to sail under a banner that took me from my father as to live here under a banner that waits to see if he remembers my name. Father will. Robb began and stopped because the word had come of its own will and made a hole in him at once. He looked at Catelyn. She could see his father in him when he remembered to be quiet. He weighed. He balanced. He made the scale true. Rosalind said nothing, because this was not matter for her voice in the open. Later, she asked Caitlin, "Will he come back?" Caitlin looked at the river as she answered, because she did not like to lie if she could help it, and looking at water helped her see what could be said. "Some men are lost at sea," she said. "Some are found there. He may find himself, or he will be the wave that looks like a ship a long time, and then breaks when it reaches shore." Rosalind nodded, and her eyes were very calm, and Caitlin felt a sudden fierce tenderness toward her, because that calm had been a hard-won thing. It was not the calm of ignorance. Weeks made their small stacks. The war did not sleep. Tywin moved pieces around his board as if the board were the point and not the pieces. Robb learned how to win where he would not wish to be, and how to lose as little as possible, where victory had never been on offer. He kept his word to Lord Walder. He kept it in the way a man carries a heavy bundle, because it holds not only his things, but those of others. Now and again, a Frey said something, in the hearing of someone who reminded him the bridge had already been crossed. And then the Frey would lower his voice and speak of the price of barley, as if that had been the subject all along. Sometimes in the moments that were left to them, Robb and Rosalind walked the parapet of River Run when the torches had been doused, and the moon had decided to show its face. They spoke of small things and of large in the same tone, which is how true marriages go when there is more life outside the chamber than in it. He told her the names of the stars as old Nan had told them to him, and she told him how the twins had taught her to look down more often than up and how thin that had made the sky. He showed her the watchword for the night in case she was challenged, and she practiced saying it as if one's life could be saved by making a guard laugh, and she intended to do both at once. She asked about winter. He explained the long, slow cruelty of it, the way the world creeps inside to live with you, until there is not enough room for your grief and your bread both. She asked about snow on wolves' backs and whether birds really froze in place in the trees. He told her that some mornings he had found them as if carved by a craftsman with no sense of pity, and warmed them in his hands until they fluttered astonished and very angry. She laughed at that, and the sound moved across the stone like a small animal certain it could find its way home. On a dawn that smelled of thistle and soot, a raven came and left more than ink on their hands. The news of Winterfell burned as if written in lye. The words were quick, the letters of a hand that had learned its task badly, the truth in them a cold at the root of the teeth, the inn's name, the smoke of their own home, the boys. News come in fragments is a torture. News complete can be worse. Robb sat in Caitlyn's small room and did not move for a long time, because he was a boy and a man and a king of men who had not wanted any crown, and all of those selves were being burned at once. Rosalind came and did not touch him because there is a kind of grief that cannot bear a hand. She sat near and did the work of turning air into breath and back again. Slow, measurable, a thing one can keep doing even when doing anything else is impossible. When his hands unclenched so that blood made its way back into the knuckles, she said, "I am here," in the tone one uses to a horse that has been broken badly by someone else and has allowed you near again anyway. Later, when he had risen and gone to court, and to the council, and to the river, and done all the things a man who leads must do after being struck with a hammer, she went to Caitlin and said, "Tell me what I can do for him when he returns without the answer he wants." Caitlin thought of all the years she had stayed beside a man who could not be helped in the ways she had wished to help him. "Do not ask him what he will do," she said. "He will be asked that all day. Ask him what he remembers, that is good. Make him say it out loud, and then say it again a different way so it cannot be lost in the room. Bring him water and make him drink it if you have to tell a silly story to do it. Then when he sleeps, sleep near him, but do not twitch at every noise." "I can do that," Rosalind said. She did. She made him drink water by telling a story about one of Lord Walder's wives, who could not keep a plant alive if it were a rock, and so watered the freckled cat until it learned to sleep on a shelf to avoid kindness. She asked him what he remembered that was good, and he said, "Bran used to throw walnuts at the ravens," and she said, "Because they look like small men in capes," and he laughed and said, That is what Arya said, and the words Arya said were a thing that could have broken him in two if said differently. She kept them whole with him for an hour. War makes a habit of coming to find a man wherever he hides. Letters came, and men came with faces that promised no ease. Rickard Karstark's sons lay down in the whispering wood and had not risen. Their father's grief began to eat its way to the surface. Catelyn looked at the man and saw a mountain thawing at the edges, and she could not say, "Wait, winter will come again and hold you together." She saw the way he looked at the prisoners with Lannister hair and Lannister mouths, and knew there would be more work than anybody could write down in their neat lists. She spoke to Robb of mercy because she knew he would need to know where it lived, so he could visit it when the time came. He listened with courtesy, and then with heat. "We cannot make of mercy an altar," he said. "It will not care what we lay on it. It will make of it a fire and leave us in the smoke. Mercy is a door," she said. "You need not go through, but you should know where it is." He took the measure of his anger and put some of it back where it belonged. He went out and set men to their tasks, as if men were creatures that flourished at being told what they were good at. Sometimes they are. A man sent to sharpen spears can be content, where the man sent to sit can rot in his mind. At night, the river moved with a sound like pages turning. Rosalind learned to tell which of the noises at night meant what she must wake for, and which she could leave to others. She learned how to put a hand on a man's forehead and read the future from the heat there. She learned how to make soup taste of something when it tasted of nothing. She learned when to leave a blossom on the table if there was one to be found. And the men respected her for knowing the difference between what a blossom can and cannot do. In those days, which were not quiet but taught the people in them new ways to listen, Robb and Rosalind came to lie awake sometimes on their narrow bed and speak quietly, so quietly that even the mice might have missed it. "If we live," she said once, not as a child trying to tug at the hem of fate to get its attention, but simply laying a stake as any gambler does. "I want a day in which nothing is asked of me but to walk from one end of a field to another and back again slow enough that the wind has time to smell me." "We will have that," he said. "In the north if we can. Or here, where the fields complain of being walked too little lately. Or nowhere. But we will have it in some form. A field. A walk. A wind. Mend and shower. And if we die," she said. "Then we will have had a bridge," he said, and she laughed. Not because it was a jest, but because it was good to say the particular thing that had made them other than what they had been. A messenger brought news of Balon Greyjoy, and his own old hunger turned into new harm. Letters came folded with blood at the torn edge where someone had not been careful cutting. Winterfell stones did not turn back from heat with the dignity of old creatures. They behaved as any stones would, cracking, keeping heat long, cooling and forgetting who had warmed them. Robb's face became a place where a man could watch a storm and learn the difference between vanity and necessity. He wrote to men who had once called him boy, and used the word must. He did not write to Lord Walder. He did not need to. The old man would count the days and know the weather by it, and speak later with the authority of a scholar of delays. In the end, it came to a morning with low cloud, and a taste in the air like iron on the tongue. The promise of rain or blood. The world cannot always bother to distinguish. Robb rose early, as he had begun to do, and went to the wall, and looked out at nothing he had not seen before. Rosalind came and stood beside him without saying good morning. It would not have fit. She slipped her hand into the sleeve of his cloak where it was warm, and he leaned a little into her, and for a moment, there was the ordinary miracle of two people, standing in a place that thought itself infallibly stone and feeling it warm. "Say one ordinary thing," she said, "before you go and be the other sort." "Grey wind will steal the cook's pie if the lid is not heavy," he said at once, and she laughed because he had kept that ready for her. She offered one back. "Mage snores like a satisfied goose," she said. And he said, "I will tell her." And she said, "You will do no such thing." And then, because time was a wheel and could not be stopped, he went to make orders, and she went to teach a girl to thread a needle with her eyes half closed, because you must learn to do it in the dark. That day would not be the one to name the shape of their fates. It was a day among days. But in every day there is a thread that will one day be part of an end. In the hall, where shadows learn to lean to the left by afternoon and to the right by morning, Caitlin said to Brynden. He has put his foot on the road he meant to walk. And Brynden said, he has, and they did not talk of the stones that roll. Rosalind stood at a window with her hands flat on the sill and watched a pair of small boys in the yard have a sword fight with sticks, their laughter breaking as it always does when someone takes a blow and decides whether to be wounded or amused. She smiled and felt at the same time the ache in her chest that is a woman's when she knows she will be asked to be strong, and will be, again and again, without anyone having to say the words. She put her head down and said into the stone, "Let there be bread," because bread is a thing a woman can ask for without having to beg the gods to change their minds. The day went about its business. Men were cruel and kind in their usual proportions. The river kept its storytelling to itself, and did not drown anyone it had not intended to drown all along. Robb took his warhood into the woods, not because he wanted the woods to have it, but because that is where events had arranged to meet him. He returned before dusk, his face bearing the strain of not having lost what could not be lost. And Rosalind took his cloak and put it where it would dry and put his pride where it would not catch fire from the proximity to the hearth. When night came, it came fully. As it does in places where people have taught themselves not to fear it so much, they never step out into it. The torches burned. The banners stirred. A fiddler played a tune that had been originally about a woman's hair, and was now about a good horse. Caitlin went from one person to another the way cook fires jump in a cold grate, until the whole thing finally takes. She passed a hand over Rosalind's hair, and felt the living of it, the warmth of a scalp that had been kissed by rain and hands and the wind. She thought then of Ned not as a sorrow to be borne, but as a man who might be standing, if he could, somewhere a little a ways where he could see his son and measure the weight of his choices without making himself known. Because that had been his way. He would not disturb a thing that was testing itself unless it needed to be saved from folly. And even then, he would wait one last heartbeat before acting, in case the boy saved him. Robb stood with his lords and took counsel, and then he stood alone and took his measure. He looked toward the river and saw only the ordinary run of it. There were days when the world made itself clear, and this was not one. He looked up, and the night was full of indifferent stars. He did not find comfort, and did not feel the lack of it. He did not ask the night to love him. He did not hate it for not doing so. He set his shoulders and went back to where the men were. By the next morning, he would have made another set of choices. By the next fortnight, some of those would prove wise, and some merely lucky, and some neither. The knife inside Rickard Karstark would find its way outward by someone's name. Roose Bolton would be where he had been, and where he intended to be, which is to say nowhere anyone could point to until all the pointing had been done. Lord Walder would count the days with his finger upon a board, and call that piety toward time. Theon Greyjoy would stand on a shore he had dreamed of, and find that dreams are not floors to stand upon. For the moment, in the thin space between what had been and what would be, the water touched stone and drew back, and touched and drew back. The sound of it, the oldest counting there is. Rosalind slept with her hand open, a gesture learned from a child who has been taught to let go of what she must in order to be given what she needs. Caitlin lay awake and breathed slowly, and did not bargain with any god, who had not asked to be bargained with. Brynden looked at the map and out the window and did not confuse the two. Robb Stark stood beneath the bare sky and felt the world balance itself around the weight he had chosen to carry. He had taken a Frey bride for a bridge and found in her a road. He had walked over water, and it had held him because he had treated it like a thing with a spirit. He drew his cloak around him against the morning's bare hands and went to the work that men sing about later, because the work of singing is easier when the men are gone. He smiled briefly, thinking of Grey Wind and a pie and Mage Mormont and geese. Then he set his mouth in the shape he had taught it and called for his horse.